Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Cameron Groves, the Director of Rapid Innovation and Specialist Engineering at Google Public Sector. Cameron, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise, yes.
Of course, we're talking about a host of topics here, really focusing on the rise of AI and some of the shifting going on there. We've seen the shift from generative AI to agentic AI. How have you seen that shift transform how agencies approach their mission outcomes and their digital transformation goals?
Quite a bit, actually. As you might imagine, it's been unbelievable what's unfolded the last couple of years, 2-3 years, where we've seen a lot of federal entities move from this notion of kind of pilots, or even then just even testing out chatbot kind of experiences, to last year looking at agents and exploring how agents can ultimately help them be able to do certain tasks. To now what we're saying here is enterprise-ready AI using full end-to-end agents overall. If you look at what's happening within the industry, especially with what we're at with regard to our full AI stack, is we've been partnering closely with the Department of War. And you might have heard about GenAI.mil and really Gemini, Google Gemini that is, our large language model, is powering much of what is the front door there with our Gemini for Government. And what we're seeing there is well over 1 million users are using that front door in terms of being able to interact not just with the chat experience, but also agents as well. So we have something baked into the platform there that we activated just recently, and within a matter of 24 to 48 hours, if I'm not mistaken, they used a no-code, low-code environment to build over 100,000 agents across those 1 million users. So it's tremendous in terms of the adoption that they're seeing in terms of being able to move from a chat experience to be able to adopt customized agents to help their workflow. We're also seeing at the Food and Drug Administration in terms of looking at the clinical trial process, to look across the full workflows to be able to use agents and stitch these agents together to be able to transform moving away from the chat, not just the chat experience, to now a full end-to-end workflow using agents overall.
A lot of great use cases there.
Yes.
Of course, government-wide agencies are learning to do more with less. We've seen budget constraints, we've seen workforce reductions. Can you share some examples of how AI agents can automate some of the workflows that will allow agencies to do more with less?
Absolutely. I think one thing just to note though, it's not about replacing humans in terms of individuals with regard to with the use of AI. It's augmentation. Just going back to the Food and Drug Administration example, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the clinical trial process. I don't know, how long do you think it takes in terms of being able to approve a drug just with pharmaceutical companies today?
Maybe a couple of months.
It's 10 years, 12 years potentially in terms of the research that goes in for the pharmaceutical companies, and they have to go through the trial process, the 3 different phases. Well, FDA actually has adopted using AI of actually enhancing the clinical trial process to be able to not have a back and forth in terms of between the pharmaceutical company and the actual, the FDA themselves and the scientists and the researchers looking at the drug and the results. What they're doing is they're using AI to do this in real time. What this allows them to do is having a scientist who's evaluating the application process and the results of the trial is they're able to look across 75-page documents to be able to use AI to be able to summarize that information. What that allows us to do, what them to do, is being able to now refocus the scientists to now more, I would say, scientific research type of tasks related to that to be able to enhance the clinical trial process and reduce that time, which is super exciting. The other thing that we're seeing in terms of overall is like with Department of Transportation. They've adopted across their 50,000 workers using our Google Workspace, which has baked in our Gemini platform, allowing them to be able to look at their tasks overall and automate them in terms of being able to use the agents built into Google Workspace.
So it sounds a lot like these employees are being maximally productive, being able to use these tools.
Absolutely, it really is. And I think it's about, I would say understanding and really in terms of being able to train the staff in terms of that. And I think with regard to the Department of War, like we've partnered with them to be able to train 5,000 plus personnel as it relates to be able to use that just in the matter of the last 6 to 8 months. And I think it's a really important point in terms of being able to be aware of the power of these tools. I think there's a lot of fear out there in terms of the unknowns, fear of with regard to job replacement and so forth, but no, it's about augmentation. I'll tell you, I certainly couldn't get through the day. Just even coming here today, I did a variety of things in terms of helping me prepare for my day, look at my inbox and so forth, and be able to use the agents within our platform. It's just part of my work day these days. So.
Right. Of course, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle when we talk about AI. Security is obviously a top concern for all agencies involved. How can things like zero trust architecture enable agencies to safely adopt and deploy these AI agents, make sure the proper guardrails are in place?
Yeah, so like security has to be baked in, and it's baked in through our full portfolio in terms of our full stack. And it needs to be not just be bolted on as well. So we pioneered zero trust architecture in terms of inside of Google. So don't trust you, me, in terms of being able to interact with the systems. And that needs to be adopted overall, as you mentioned in your statement question. And just yesterday, we released our AI threat defense kind of platform. And what that allows us to do is to be able to look at the code inside of the applications that are written inside these federal agencies, but broadly speaking, be able to also look at, because AI itself has upset the paradigm shift in terms of security. I'm sure you've heard of Mythos that just recently got released about a couple months ago with Anthropic. And that has really looked at and be able to use these models to be able to look at vulnerabilities in the software and using AI to do so. And so it's really upset that paradigm shift just to kind of reinforce that. And Google, we believe that we have an approach that we have adopted internally to be able to look in terms of prepare, in terms of the code itself, be able to scan and prioritize, and then from there be able to then harden the code itself, and then from there monitor. And we have agents that are actually being applied in this new paradigm shift that can proactively do this in terms of our research with Google DeepMind, being able to apply that here with regard to it overall. So this is really a very important kind of environment that we're in today, and using AI now to be able to enhance the security, building upon the zero trust foundation. The other thing I'll mention here in the last 3 to 4 years that I've been here at Google Public Sector is our investment with regard to compliance. So that was security. Compliance is another really important part of all this. I think just recently we have 170 FedRAMP compliance services that got released, and as a result, or got approved, and there's more to come. And so the investment that we've made in public sector has been huge in terms from a compliance standpoint as well.
That's all encouraging to hear. Of course, when it comes to AI and cybersecurity, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. The barrier to entry has been lowered for everyone, including adversaries who may also use those AI tools to be on the offensive. And so when it comes to the defense side of things, trying to keep those bad actors out of the networks, what more can agencies do to stay ahead of this rise in threats?
I think it's about using the AI technology in terms of the agents that are out there. So like, for example, I mentioned monitor as like the fourth step of the flywheel in terms of, prepare, scan, prioritize, harden, and then monitor. And that monitoring, there's the capabilities within our portfolio, notably with the Wiz acquisition that we made recently around a blue team agent. And that blue team agent can monitor proactively, not just be able to identify things, but even actually perform actions, as it relates to be able to hook into Google's DeepMind's code mender to be able to even write code that can go to a human to be able to then from there plug the actual hole that's been identified in terms of that vulnerability. And so we have to be able to move at that machine speed and move beyond the human in terms of being able to, yes, review it, but also be able to then remediate it and then have the human review it almost in real time. And that's really where this is all going with regard to now this paradigm shift that has been introduced just recently. Of course, in terms of also the bad actors that you mentioned.
When it comes to implementation across the public sector, it seems like there's a real considerable spectrum. You mentioned the Pentagon being kind of the tip of the spear as far as AI implementation. Some other agencies may be a little bit lower on that learning curve. We have seen hundreds and hundreds of AI use cases across the federal government. Some of those are in active deployment, some of those are in the pilot stage, and it can be hard to navigate from point A to point B, getting from pilot to implementation to enterprise-wide adoption. In terms of looking at what succeeds and what doesn't, in terms of crossing that valley, what have you observed as far as the trends or the traits that allow pilots to scale up successfully?
So I think this is a really passionate topic of mine right now, actually. Because I see across all the public sector, and I don't just focus on the federal space. And one of the things that I'll say is to slow down. I'm not saying in terms of like not move fast, but to take a moment to look at the personas, because what's happening is, just to begin with in terms of the problem that I'm noticing, is be able to jump right in. We'll just give this to somebody to be able to interact with it, build agents. Well, no, they need to understand what exactly it is and be able to give context, right, in terms of the capability that's been given to them, that front door to using AI. And so being able to stop for a moment, be able to look at the personas, what are the challenges that they're seeing in terms of being able to go and understand how they could maybe use this to augment their current workflows, allows then from there a greater set of adoption curve in terms of, certainly you'll have those early adopters, those folks that have it baked already into their daily lives, but those early majority and even before that, be able to use AI, they have to be able to understand it and be able to work closely with them. So it's really understanding the personas, looking at the workflows, and then from there being able to then really work with them to be able to train them in how to use the technology to do certain things. So for example, like let's say permitting as an example. Being able to look at, from a permitting review standpoint, they may have a full workflow that they may have to do. That workflow can be able to upload a PDF and be able to interact with that PDF and identify where the actual gaps may be against a certain regulatory code base. And so being able to show them how that could help augment them in terms of decision processing, be able to improve the way that they do reviews, be able to then help them overall in terms of doing their job. So that's just an example of just really how they could ultimately use the AI to be able to help them do their job day in and day out, and taking that time to understand their persona, understanding what their problems are and how they can help them. No different than probably a lot of technologies today. So, but nonetheless, I think there's so much pressure to be able to use it, and it's an opportunity to just take a moment and plan, and then from there, and then build a scale it, plan out from there.
Sure. Pulling on that thread a little bit longer, for those people, those agencies that are a little bit earlier in that learning curve, what are those first few critical steps or quick wins for an agency that are perhaps looking to deploy AI for the first time in 2026?
Yeah, so I think there's like administrative tasks certainly are certainly low-hanging fruit. As an example, could be on the contract shop, being able to help write RFPs, be able to then evaluate RFPs. You can upload a score of the actual the score of the RFP itself, and then from there being able to evaluate and help augment there. So that's just one example that we've seen in terms of being able to augment the workflows. The permitting example I gave a few minutes ago, helping prepare daily briefs is another example of agents that my team has been helping with. The Department of War team is being able to prepare very daily briefings to be able to help them be able to improve, or from there improve their output in terms of scale, in terms of time, and so forth. So just a couple of examples there.
And Cameron, you mentioned how there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in the administrative work area, that's a target-rich environment for AI. Are there other use cases you see as being potentially low-hanging fruit in this area for AI?
Absolutely. So there's certainly administrative tasks, but also I would say there's also on the medical side as well. So we partner closely with the dean at the Uniformed Services University over here that's based out of Walter Reed, or the Department of War's medical school, where clinicians actually, upon performing a case, whether it be a surgery, procedure, et cetera, they have to go back into basically a spreadsheet to be able to fill out the various things that they have done, which then of course creates medical billing codings, or just in terms of just coding in general, that they can be kind of charged back, if you will, at the completion of that case. As you might imagine, a surgeon is focused on a variety of things, right? It's not just their regular job, but they have other jobs there, perhaps at USU or otherwise. And there's a backlog that as results from that being able to say, oh shoot, I got to go back and do that spreadsheet completion. Well, that experience is not very good. Well, we partner with them to be able to create the ability to be able to use AI for the actual surgeon at the completion of their case, to be able to speak into an application. And it's agnostic across multiple platforms for them for ease of use. And AI then takes the speech that's generated, or they can type it in, and then from there it actually extracts the codes themselves to be able to help now them to streamline their work. That's one way in terms of today moving forward. But furthermore, what we did is they have a tremendous backlog in terms of these various spreadsheets and the sort. And what that allows us to do is to use AI to create a huge batch process to take across hundreds of thousands of different kind of cases that they've done, and then from there be able to align it to medical readiness, which we'll come back to in a minute. But it allows us then from there all the coding to be done, and it goes into a central repository. So you may be wondering why this is so important. Why this is so important is because the Surgeon General across the various departments, they have to be able to showcase readiness. So if the certain surgeon has been able to perform a certain set of tasks, or in terms of cases, they've done X percentage, it allows them to see the percentage and the whole view across the whole department as a whole. And so this backlog and using AI, yes, it may seem like an administrative task to the surgeon, but this is now military readiness overall at the department level. So this is the true power of using AI. It could be seen as low-hanging fruit. Certainly there's things we've interviewed with the surgeons, the doctors, et cetera, to be able to do this, but this is the power of Google Gemini being able to be applied to here, in this case here with Uniformed Services University.
It's a great example. Maybe going back to an earlier point about the change involved here. This does seem like a lot of change management for agencies. This is fast-moving technology, and
yes.
a lot of the stuff is rapidly evolving for agencies to wrap their heads around. From a leadership perspective, what can these agencies do to communicate the value proposition of what's coming for them, and how employees can be better engaged, more engaged into have this be a game changer for their day-to-day work?
Yeah, change management is introducing anything net new, especially something as revolutionary as AI, has to be kind of introduced in a certain element of culture. There is, of course, the command and control kind of way. This is going to be the way, and certainly GenAI.mil was certainly done that way in terms of the culture, right, with the Department of War. There's also, with regard to Uniformed Services University, the example I just gave, you have somebody who is forward-leaning in terms of with the dean about seeing forth, being able to use AI to be able to help streamline a certain process. And then from there, bringing in the surgeons to co-build, to be able to bring to life that particular problem using AI. It's going to be solve that particular problem using AI. So command and control, basically it changed agents in that regard. And so being able to identify those, that's the same also at the FDA too, by the way. There's a change agent with the chief AI officer who saw the opportunity to use AI to improve the clinical trial process that we talked about earlier. And so that identifying those individuals, or depending upon your culture, allows for them from there to be able to identify those personas I mentioned earlier, to then find those individuals who are those early adopters to show the way, amplify those, and then from there be able to scale out to other use cases and others individuals, other personas that may be higher risk, but also be a bit more skeptical too. It allows you then from there to permeate out and be able to adopt AI to help improve bureaucratic processes, but more importantly, really enhance the experience for everyone in terms of being able to move at mission speed that we need to these days.
We spoke a bit about the efficiency proposition of this, that it is a force multiplier for the workforce in place, but maybe to pivot on that a little bit, it does seem that by tackling some of the administrative work that's on these employees' plates, the AI is giving these employees time back in their day to do the higher order skills that they were hired to do in the first place. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So like in the Food and Drug Administration example here, like 10 to 12 years, certainly it's not going to, in terms of the scientist's time to be able to look across the pharmaceutical company's submissions and so forth. It's going to give back time in terms of them to be able to do the research that they want to focus in and day out on. The other example with regard to USU and the surgeons, giving back them time, whether to be continuing education for their particular needs in terms of their requirements they have. That's the goal here, is to give back the time to go do something even more important to them and augment them overall. So that's definitely just two examples in terms of using AI to augment them and give back them more time. Yeah.
Trust, of course, is also another big piece of AI, making sure that, going back to the change management piece, that employees feel that they can rely on these tools. Of course, always double check your work regardless of what's crossing your desk.
It's augmentation. I just want to make sure that is really an important message about all this. Not about replacement, it's about augmentation overall.
Yeah, but what do you feel are some of the building blocks to that trust, that there's trust enabled in these agencies as they are deploying these AI tools?
Trust enabled in terms of, can you expand upon that?
Sure, yeah. Trust within the workforce, trust within the leadership, that the tools that they're using, they believe that they are consistent, that they're transparent, explainable, all the buzzwords there.
Yes, no, absolutely. But I don't think they're just buzzwords. I think they're very important, right? And at Google, we take this very seriously in terms of responsible AI overall. But I think when you interact with the technology, the results that are returned have grounding in them. And those grounding have references and sources related to them. And so you're able to see very easily where the large language model, in this case Gemini, is actually referring how it got to its answer. And that allows them from there to be able to gain trust. The other thing to note is that you'll be able to augment with their data. It's not that the model is trained with their data or would ever be trained with their data. Your data is your data. With regard to also to knowing that that separation exists is really important to be able to communicate out as part of the communication plan with the change management, with introducing these technologies into the enterprises overall within across the federal space. So just a couple of different things I want to call out is that responsible AI is really something that's core to Google. But furthermore, it's baked into the technology stack, but there's actual things, sources that you'll see when you interact with the technology that's there. So,
going back to the cybersecurity piece of the puzzle, you mentioned Google Public Sector rolling out this AI threat defense platform. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and how that's meant to bring AI to the cybersecurity domain and defend against these threat actors?
Yeah, absolutely. So that just was announced here on May 27th in terms of the point of view, in terms of our capabilities around this. And it's actually an approach, right? I mean, Google, we've been at the forefront of security. It's baked into our platform stack from the core infrastructure, the chipsets, all the way up in terms of the models, et cetera. So that's just, it's foundationally built in. And so with regard to that, we actually, with this Google AI Threat Defense that you mentioned, we've actually have publicly kind of released an approach in terms of a flywheel, whereby you look at the core in terms of the core environment in terms of like itself, and then from there you scan and prioritize it, and then from there you actually remediate, and then from there you then harden. And so this cycle overall allows you now to take an approach to be able to move at machine speed, using technology across the Google portfolio. So as I mentioned earlier, in terms of monitor, we made an acquisition recently of a company by the name of Wiz, and as a result of that, they actually have released an agent called a Blue Team agent that's monitoring proactively inside of a customer infrastructure. That allows from them to be able to not just proactively monitor, be able to perform action. So within DeepMind, which of course is the father or the mother, however you want to put it, of Gemini, they actually have a capability called Code Mender. And Code Mender paired with that agent allows for that to be able to write code to remediate when something has been identified. And so that, as a result, showcases that while a human does need to be in the loop, perhaps in terms of that scenario, depending upon the scenario of identification of a vulnerability, but using it at machine speed to be able to perform remediation, because we have to be able to move at that machine speed at the world, the advent of Mythos and everything that's going on right now with regard to this. So this is something very important to us, very exciting, to take a methodology with a storied history of Google in terms of security, all the while be able to now, in this new paradigm shift that we're in with using AI, but also be able to protect the core infrastructure and the applications in terms of inside these enterprises that we all are near and dear to our heart, and of course protect us here.
A lot of what we've been talking about falls down into people, process, and technology. Yeah. We've talked a lot about the people, we've talked a lot about the technology. As far as the process side of things, identifying what processes are good candidates for automation, for AI, what are some of the good best practices of going through that process and identifying what is good to automate?
I can't sit here and say, because I don't know the mission as well as the person in the mission itself. So I want to be careful about in terms of saying this is where you should start. But I would say looking across your mission, identifying what are some of, not just low-hanging fruit, but also what are the more challenging problems that you have in terms of the multi-process step flows that are happening across various departments? Is there a way to be able to now introduce a conversation across those departments to be able to look at being able to use agents and stitch agents together to perform those tasks, to help now bridge together departments, agencies, and sub-department agencies to be able to interact with each other from that point of view? And what I'm saying is that it can bring people together and collaborate in terms of looking at the process, the mission workflows that they're doing today. It's similar, honestly, to the USU example that I mentioned, right? That's not just at USU, they're a university. This is actually across defense health overall, that we're looking at how we be able to look at the coding exercise that's going on for all surgeons, all in support of military readiness across defense health, right? That's an example, low-hanging fruit, high impact, and then from there being able to go across the defense health overall. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is a fast-moving space, Cameron. We've hit on that
Yes.
quite a bit. But looking in the future here, where do you see the public sector in terms of adoption a year from now, 2 years from now?
Yeah. I think one thing to note is the world that we're in today is the worst it's ever going to be, meaning it's going to get increasingly better by the moment, or by not just the minute, the day, the week, whatever. And it's exciting, truly exciting what's going on, and certainly feel very privileged to be at the forefront of all this. But what I will say is I can't predict the future in terms of what's going on, but what I can say is being able to, for a word of advice, is being able to stay up to speed on what's going on. Because if you don't, it's going to pass you by almost in a matter of minutes. And so really stay close, working closely with your partners in the industry to be able to adopt maybe what they're doing. And in terms of use cases, I always like this quote that from Larry Page in terms of, if you're not doing some things that are crazy, then you're doing the wrong things. I'm not suggesting that people are crazy, but the point is that with the world that we're in today and the speed at which it's moving, being able to look at things from a new light and using the technology and what's there truly is revolutionary in the world that we're in today. So I couldn't be more excited, and I look forward to continuing the conversations.
Cameron, thanks so much. We covered a lot of ground.
Yes, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks again to today's guest, Cameron Groves, the Director of Rapid Innovation and Specialist Engineering at Google Public Sector. I'm Jory Heckman, and you're watching the Cloud Exchange on Federal News Network.